All right, let's go. I hate it when I start a sentence in a conversation in a class with gosh, that's so ridiculous. So as you are watching this recorded later, please know I'm working on starting classes in a more intelligent way rather than saying The reason for my was I wanted to share how to apply oils before we got started. And I was wondering how best to do that. I had just applied an oil called Highest Potential for myself, putting on my throat. And as I did that, I hit record and I thought, maybe I should share with that why I did that before we dive into the topic. The topic of the day is dealing with disappointment. There I go with the again. God, I don't know why that's bothering me, but it is. So one of the things that I shared with everybody is to grab the oil and vision. So if you have this oil, then work with it with me for a few moments before we begin. If you don't have this oil, I'd love to suggest that you use something like lemon, peppermint, something to wake up your senses, wake up your brain. Lemon and peppermint together are beautiful. The reason why I'm choosing Envision, and I'll sort of out myself on the class here in a minute, is we're going to be talking a little bit about your purpose and your destiny. And without a vision, you will not be able to figure that out. Envision is an oil that helps open up that intuitive part of your brain and your mind so that you can know your purpose and your destiny and your calling and on and on. So here we go. We're going to put this on, breathe it in. And put a little bit here on your forehead and back here on the back of your neck, and really just take your time, enjoy it. If you're using peppermint and lemon, maybe don't do this so much. I've done that. I don't know. I'm a rookie. Apparently, been using oils for 11 years now, and I still put peppermint in my eye. When we use Envision, it helps, like I say, to open up all of that, but also shake off any cobwebs that might have accumulated in your brain and in your mind. The other thing that I want to share is I'm starting to do more classes where people pop in that are not essential oil users. There is this thing in our culture where oils are so prolific, and yet there's a whole host of people who don't use them for whatever reason. This is not a have to. Everything I share can be done totally and completely without oils. However, it doesn't go as quickly and as efficiently. It's just my unofficial research that I've done. You want it to go lickety split and be with ease and smooth. Use your oils. If you're okay with kind of taking stabs at it, then oils are not necessary. They just help. They just speed up the process. So with that, we've got our Envision or lemon and peppermint, or just sitting back, kind of taking it all in. Let's dive into disappointment. I had to write this word. When I wrote this class, I wrote the word disappointment so many times. I swear to God, if I never see the word disappointment again, it'll be too soon. It started to be this low frequency word that I thought, this is a horrible word. It really is a terrible word. Let me read you the definition per dictionary.com. Disappoint. It means to fail to fulfill the expectations or wishes of, fill in the blank. The next one is to defeat the fulfillment of, parentheses, hopes, plans, etc., to thwart or to frustrate. I have been studying Hebrew and Greek. I know, light topics, but I study these languages. My kids are studying it. We love language. It's a great way to look at different cultures. One of the reasons why I like to study Hebrew, number one, it's what the Bible was written. And number two, it's just so fascinating to me to read God's language, right? And to learn and to grow in that. One of the things that I realized is there's no word for disappoint in that language. There's also no word for allow, or there's no word for let. So just for those of you Bible scholars, just have that in your hat for a bit. I find this word disappoint very disappointing. It doesn't even, and as I wrote the class, I'm thinking, gosh, we're not even calling the feeling that we think we have disappointment what it actually is. So we'll talk about disappointment, and then, but really sneakily, what we're going to do is dive into the root of disappointment. Because when you look at this, fail to fulfill the expectation or wishes of, to defeat the fulfillment of hopes, plans, dreams, etc., to thwart, to frustrate, disappoint. When you break that apart, it doesn't, in my opinion, this is all me, doesn't really match up with that. So to dis, like you separate that word, you have dis, to not have an appointment. It's actually, if you break that word up in Latin or wherever the root is, it's really more of a missed appointment, missing an appoint, if that makes sense. So if you, a little bit of word scholar there, or diving in, whatever you want to call it, putting those two words together really doesn't match up. It just brings you down to a whole nother level that's unhealthy. Dealing with disappointment begins with looking at the root of the emotion that's behind the disappointment and knowing, and so this is point two. This is, first you look at the root of the emotion, and the second thing is knowing your purpose in life, so that when seemingly things that look like a setback, right, come up, you are able to quickly realize a way to make that disappointment, we'll call it that for now, work for you. That's part of knowing your purpose and why. This class is a part 2 in a whole emotion series. The first was ridding yourself of bitterness. Tonight's is talking about dealing with disappointment, and really the subheading is dealing with the emotions that go along with that are really the basis of that. Part 3 will be next week, and that's alleviating anger. And that's going to be a big one. Tell your friends, call your mom, your grandma, whoever. Alleviating anger is powerful. When you think about disappointment, don't do it too long, but when you do, understand that the emotions that are behind that, really the root of disappointment, are about 4 things. Could be more. I would give you, if you want to argue with me that there's this one or that one, I'll give it to you. But really, when you break it down, it comes down to 4 things. You have sadness, you have anger, frustration, and then you have grief, which stems from loss. So disappointment is a negative emotion that you feel, or it's really not, it's a noun. It's like love. So it is kind of an emotion, but it's more of a thing, like a tangible thing that you might feel when an outcome doesn't match up to your expectations. So it's characterized by the feelings that I just listed. If you were to go on Google, which I have, I love doing that. Whenever I write any class, I'm like, what is the Google saying? Because there's an alarming amount of people who Google negative emotions, how to get rid of this, how to heal that, da, 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 da. So I like to do that. See, what are people, when you do that, I want to know what you're coming up with. And I'm going to tell you right now, tell a friend, you're finding a crap ton of nonsense out there. It's alarming to me how in a world that's so into self-help and psychology, all of this, it's like, it's utter rubbish when I look at it. For example, the Google says that disappointment is an unavoidable part of life. Wow, thanks Google for bringing us way down. I'm already feeling disappointed. Now you're telling me this is just part of life. According to the word of God, that's a load of crap. Then that's the official statement from Jen Weir. Experience is a fine teacher. God is a much better one. Disappointment does not have to be a part of your life. You're probably here because it has been. And I'm here to help you heal your past, stay grounded in your present, but run towards your future with great joy, because there is a good and expected end for every one of us, every single one of us. And there is a future for hope and a promise, not a future full of disappointment, or at least dotted with disappointment. No. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about how to get rid of that past, but then also heading it off. If you've been in any of my emotion classes, you know we talk about heading triggers off of the past, same kind of thing. And these 3 classes are just a snapshot into the emotion class that I teach. If you're ever interested in, we do a deep dive into setting you free from all of that soul the negative soul stuff, right? Okay, so that's the Google. If you fall into disappointment, I can understand that it can feel as though it's challenging to overcome it and to deal with it. Yet, it is relatively simple if you understand the root. Everything in this series of classes, we talk about roots. What is the fruit that root was producing? Last week, we talked about bitterness, a little bit of that. Now it's disappointment, or really from now on, let's talk about the sadness, the frustration, sadness and frustration right together, anger together. Like think about these three together, creating this umbrella of disappointment, painting a very lovely picture, I'm sure. When dealing with any negative emotion, what I like to do, and this is something that you need to write down, is look at what the opposite word is so that it gives you an end game. It gives you something to shoot for. Sad, I want to be happy. That's a no-brainer. Angry, not angry. That was intelligent. My apologies. Disappointment and the sadness, frustration, anger together, creating disappointment. You have to make happy, to assist, to please, to encourage, succeed, excite, satisfy, delight. These are just a few things that you can put in your tool bag there as you are walking through this or healing from the past. Okay, this is what I want to feel. This is the goal I want to go, right? Here's where I am. Knowing your purpose in life can head off many a disappointment at the past. How? We'll talk about this, and then I want to dig into the steps of dealing with the emotions. When you have a very clear purpose, you know that anything that comes in your path that blocks you, that hinders you, is now, you become so resolute in what your end from your beginning look like, that whatever comes in your way, it's like, no, I'm not going to use this. I'm actually going to start to look at this. How can I use this for my advantage? How can I make this work for me? I'm going to give you just a quick little personal story. I think I shared it with you all last time about when we lost our baby, Judah, and then that woman and bitterness and yada, yada. If you haven't listened to that class or gone through it, I suggest you go on my YouTube and find it. Or it's probably listed private, so you're gonna need to ask me for the link. I remember having just a really hard time. I felt that disappointment, but what it was, I mean, hello, no brainer, that was grief. Yes, I felt disappointed I wasn't gonna have another baby, but that's such a benign statement to make, right? Or it's a gross understatement. It was grief, it was sadness, it was all that frustration. So yes, here comes disappointment, right? It blooms. That's like the fruit of it. And I remember saying to the Lord and praying, don't waste this grief. This is awful. This is hard. And I sure would hate for all these tears to just fall on my closet floor and not be used for any good. That might sound like a weird prayer to some of you, but that's how I think. And that's what helps me go through, because I know my purpose. Sure enough, within like 6 months' time, I had an opportunity to walk a woman through the same thing and just encourage her, listen, cry with her, pray with her. And I've had subsequent times where I could be that for somebody. Now, I have to adjust here and kind of get on my soapbox for a sec. If anyone has ever said, well, that's probably why God allowed that to happen. Number one, remember, there's no word for allow in the Hebrew dictionary, so God does not have a word for that. Number two, that's not truth. The truth is, this horrible, hard thing comes into your life, but it is used for good. There's a big giant but there. I just felt the need to say that. I see the names who are on here. I know a lot of you guys have walked through some tragedy. It was not for a purpose, but there will be purpose that can come from it. So when you know your purpose in life, your destiny, your mission, your calling, your gifts, your talents, all of that, and something comes, once you have released the sadness, grieved through it, walked through frustration, dealt with the anger, which we'll get to in a moment, you can then say, I'm going to use this. oh, am I going to use this? This is going to be the biggest step stool ladder there has ever been. And every seemingly setback that I've had, I've used it. I've used it, used the heck out of it. I've used it. So if you know what your end is supposed to look like for you, please know I'm only talking about you. Then you will use these setbacks as little stepping stones to stand on and to steady yourself, rather than looking at situations as giant obstacles that slow you down. For example, let me give you a little, couple little examples of modern day. There are an untold number of posts and memes and whatever blowing around about the price of gas currently, which I snicker at a little bit, a little snarky, I will admit, because I think nobody seems to remember 2006 in Texas when gas was over $5. I digress. This isn't the first time. However, this is a beautiful time to use this as an opportunity. This is not a setback. This is not something that, I guess you can look at it as that, or you can use it as a stepping stone, a way to look for opportunities to increase your wealth, because the Word of God says that He gives you the power to create wealth, a way to do that because there's untold amounts of opportunities and options out there, right? And using this to our advantage. I'm using that to be able to share with you, hey, we don't have to look at whatever the current culture is doing and fret and chew our fingernails and wring our hands. That's how I'm using this opportunity. There's other things in life that you can use, just modern day. For example, being stuck in traffic. Many of us look at that as a disappointment of sorts, or a setback, or a frustration, or I'm going to be late. Rather, this is a great time to practice your breathing, to meditate on truths that you are working on, that you need to help right your brain, to say out loud, if you're in the car by yourself, affirmations, a time for self-care. There's a lot of time that you can use while sitting in traffic, standing in the grocery line, all of these things. I could go on and on, but I'm pretty sure you get my point. If you know what the end will look like for you, then you'll be able to use these as stepping stones. Please know I said for you. Disappointment arises many times when we put our hope and our faith and our trust in other humans. For example, if you have a business partner and they fail to meet their end of the bargain, right? Whatever, or their expectations for their role, this can feel like a setback, that you wanted them to do this, let's say newsletter or a flyer. I don't even know what we do in businesses anymore, post on social media or LinkedIn article, right? And they don't do it. So you can understand that, yeah, we're not going to use the word disappointment. That would be, we would use that, the word would probably be anger. We're not going to be sad about it. If we get emotional about it, well, we're kind of a little bit in our feelings too much, and maybe need to deal with why we would be sad that a partner isn't working with us. Really, probably the emotion would be frustration. That's fair. So how would we deal with frustration? We need to either work it out with the person, right? Speak to them, very clear boundaries. Maybe they keep dropping the ball, but understand at the end of the day, it's also half your business. So you step in and you do what needs to be done, the end from the beginning, right? Not allowing someone else's emotional junk that's weighing them down, that's keeping them from their purpose, hinder yours. If they have a part in it, let's say they're a good writer, and now you're like, I don't know how to write. Hey, what a great opportunity for you to learn how to write, to do a newsletter, to do a flyer, to do posts, links on LinkedIn, whatever. It's a great opportunity for you to learn something. It can be a setback, but it can be easily overcome if you remember your vision, your goal, and your dream that you had at the beginning. Even in a business, even in a marriage, you cannot have your faith in one person or a group of people. I'm not saying that you shouldn't hold people to a high level of expectation, one that they are really more or higher than they're capable of. The thing is that we're all capable of more than we're actually living at. I've heard a lot of people say that many of us are living really below our means, meaning below our potential. I mean, hello, why do you think I used highest potential just now? I want to raise myself up to that level. So of course, everybody around us, it's wise to say, hey, come on, come up higher, guys, come up here. It's clearer up here. The air is much better. However, if they choose to not, it's okay, then they're going to stay there, but you keep going forward and let go of any kind of frustration that can result in bitterness, any kind of anger that can result in bitterness, right? And we can move forward. You see, many times when we just hold on to it, it's like, oh, well, they didn't help me, or he said he would take out the trash, or whatever people fight about now. I don't know. It's so dumb. My husband died. Guys, stop fighting with your spouses, please. Like, just learn to get along. When you do that and you let it go and you say, you know what, the end goal is this. I'm going to keep pushing towards the end goal. There was a time, and my husband, I know he would be okay with me sharing this story. I don't share stories, especially since he's not here for me to ask, but I always think these are things that we've talked about that I've shared with other people. There was a season in our homeschooling where he said he would take on this portion of it and he dropped the ball. His issue was fear. Didn't feel he could do it. And so I had to pick it up. Yeah, we had a discussion about it for sure. But the end goal was my child needed to finish the 10th grade. So you pick it up and you make it happen. You let go of frustration. You don't let it eat at you. When we do, bitterness comes up, and now you're back in class from last week. And we don't want bitterness rotting us, right? So what I mean is we hold people to the level of the commitment that they made, and even just a touch higher, because people will come up to the expectation that you have, or they'll completely fall away, but not to the degree that if they happen to fall or fail, you are not shaken. You have to, no, you don't have to. Please forgive me for that statement. It's important to understand the goal and where you need to go, and that you are well able and equipped to go on and continue with or without their help. And not in a henny penny, a little red hen, right? Not in that kind of, well, I guess I'll just do it myself, make the pizza or make the bread or whatever book you read as a kid. But just say, I can do this with people. This is wonderful if I do, and I can do this without, whatever this is. Your purpose in life does involve others. Of course, you are not an island. Neither am I. Having people around you is a gift to them, for sure, because you have something to offer, they have something to offer, and it's a gift for you. If they choose to not participate, if they choose to fall away or drop the ball, rather a good place to be, a healthy, thriving place to be, this is another, keep the end in mind, is to feel sad for them at their loss, not yours, and then move forward. Again, this is not a building up of a wall so that you don't ever get disappointed again. I've coached a lot of people like, oh, I just don't want to get disappointed again. I don't want to get my hopes up. I will say to you, as I say to them, your hope is in the wrong person. It's in the wrong thing. Welcome people, understand that everyone's on their own journey. What they do, what the situation is, what the world does, 2020, anybody? What happens there shouldn't affect the end goal. Knowing where your faith and your hope lie is key. Not in a person, they're not your source. If you see people and situations and work spaces, whatever you do for your trade, disappointments, if you see them as that, rather, disappointments will come. This goes back to the Google. Google's right. If you see it the way most people see, right, who get disappointed often, putting your hope and faith and trust in not God. Shift your focus on the goal, your purpose, what you're called to do, and on the one who made you. Never be disappointed again. Now, dealing with these emotions, is also knowing what to do with feelings of sadness or grief. And so when we come to the steps of, okay, we know what the emotion is, now what do I do with this? This is where I shared in the beginning to take out your trauma life and stress away. These are the oils that I thought, you know what, this will work tonight. Trauma life is good for trauma. That's a no duh, but more specifically to uproot deep-seated trauma. And I say this, gosh, I was having frozen yoga with family the other day. I'm like, we were talking about trauma. I'm like, you don't get to choose. I say this to everybody. You don't get to choose what your body quantifies as trauma. Your body does. Getting into an almost car accident, having somebody kind of almost run into, that can be traumatic for some people. Some of us, it's a little bit of an adventure, right? I'm teaching my third child how to drive. It's very exciting. Either way, you know, you can't qualify, that's just a little trauma, where the death of a whatever, we can't play that game. The point is if you understand and know, there might be some trauma there because I've had people disappoint, I've let that get to me, I'm sad, grief, whatever, frustration, trauma life. What do you want to feel instead? That's where we use our stress away. We remove that out. So first we take our trauma life. This is going to take a little bit of intuition. This is where we sit with an emotion and say, where am I in my body? Am I feeling this? Some of us are real good at pinpointing it. I feel it in my shoulders, and I feel it in my chest, maybe on my stomach. I tend to get some headaches. What kind of condition do you experience most often? That's probably a clue, a trigger of, that might be where I store emotions, negative emotions. Weirdly enough, some people have bad knees. That's stored trauma. Shoulder stuff, I've gone to chiropractors over the years for work, because when my Sayla was born, I held her like this for 8 hours, and she was in the NICU, right, for 30 days. And trauma, that's where trauma built up there. So I've been working that out. I use trauma life there a lot of times more than deep relief. And it has gotten a ton better in the last few years, ton better as I released it. So you ask, like, where is this? Use your trauma life. And then breathe it in as well, just like I showed you a few minutes ago when we started. The next thing that you would want to do is ask, when was the first time this came up, this emotion? Disappointment, that is the umbrella for frustration, anger, and sadness, and even grief. It's not the first time you felt that way. Ask the question, when was the first time I felt this way? Deal with that moment and then move forward. Because if you deal with that very first time, we talked about this last week in bitterness, the bitterness class, right? The very first time you felt that, you release that, breathing in your trauma life, applying it to the space in your body where you're holding on to that trauma that first time, getting that up and out. All of a sudden, everything after that created frustration, sadness, and anger, and maybe even gave bitterness a little space there. All of a sudden, all of those other times just go and just start unraveling, meaning coming up and out. And all of a sudden you're feeling lighter and lighter with every breath you take with the trauma life, every journaling that you write down, every time you choose to release it, it gets quicker and quicker. Journal your answer, sit with it, breathe in your oils, breathe into that memory and into the subsequent memories afterwards. Keep doing that. Take some time. As I mentioned before we began this class, you do not necessarily need oils to do this, but they are so incredibly efficient. It's your choice. You can do this and just think about it, process it, meditate, pray on it. There's a reason why God created, well, not Trauma Life, that was sort of a Gary Young blend and used with God's tools, but bergamot, right? Ylang ylang, geranium. There's a reason why. More than just pretty flowers. Now, using disappointment and disappointing situations to your advantage. In everyone's life, they have choices to use what's in front of them to their advantage or stumble over a block and never move forward. I love using the gas analogy. That and I'll probably write an article, so be warned, on my blog, really the basis of complaining, because this is where you can tell if you are option A person, where I'm going to use whatever's in front of me as a stepping stone, or I'm option B person that I'm stumbling over these things. If you complain often, number one, we talked about this last week, that's a sign that you have bitterness, straight out. But number two, complaining is addictive, and complaining is a sign that you are allowing the world's situations to stumble you, to cause you a stumbling block. Complaining about what's going on in our world is not beneficial. The fruit of that is negative. It does not propel you into the future. Being aware of it, yeah, I mean, you don't really even have to acknowledge it, right? If something negative is happening, well, let's do something about it. If you're faced with something that feels disappointing, first, assess the true emotion, right? We just talked about that. What is it? Are you sad? Angry? Do you have some frustration? Is it grief? Figure it out. What is the root of this? You thought this is how your business would go, but it didn't. You thought this is the school that you'd get into, but you didn't. You thought your children would pursue a certain path, but they're heading in an opposite direction. You thought everything would happen by this time frame, and it didn't. So what are you going to do with that? You can sit here and say, I didn't get into that school. My business isn't going the way I wanted. My children are going this way. What are you going to do? How are you going to live your life, and how are you going to move forward? In the case of like your children or a spouse, a friend or whatever, right? That's really on them. So you need to deal with your emotions that have to do with them. That's a whole nother class for a whole nother day. Your business, what are you going to do about it? You're going to quit, close up shop? That's an option. Maybe that's your opportunity to open up a bakery. I don't know. I love bread. Maybe that's your opportunity to close up and say, I'm going to try something totally new. Or opportunity to say, what went wrong here? What can I do different? How can I use this for my leverage? Just a thought. You thought things would happen in a certain time frame, and it didn't. Okay, but is there something that you've gained in that time frame? Is there something you can do in between time? Can you master time? Can you use it to your advantage? There's so many different ways we can think about this. I'm just giving you questions to ask yourself to say, how can I use this to my advantage? I'll give you an example that my family's walking through right now. My daughter, my 18-year-old, she'll be 19 on Thursday. She has this adorable little car. It's a beige PT Cruiser. We call it the marshmallow because it looks like a perfectly toasted marshmallow. Well, Marshy, as we like to call it, has been in the shop for over 2 months. And it's because there's a part on it. They don't make the cars anymore. So now you got to order it from, I don't even know where, another dealer, and it's back ordered. And she keeps getting the disappointing call of the ETA date is now da-da-da. It was, I think when they finally figured out what was wrong with it, it was going to be 2 weeks, and then May 9th was going to be the date. And they called, okay, now May 11th. And they called on Friday, okay, it's going to be Monday. And then they called again, okay, it's going to be Thursday, which is her birthday. She's like, please, a birthday gift. Wouldn't that be great? And she was frustrated. I asked her, I said, honey, give me the emotion that you're feeling, because I want to share this. And she's like, oh, it's frustration. And I love what she said. I have to give credit where credit's due. She goes, it's a stagnant form of anger. I was like, boom, That's it. My husband used to say, this is so mean, but when my kids were little, you know how when kids are crawling and they're like, they get all frustrated or they can't make something work and go. He's like, Zion. And my Zion was like, not even a year. Zion, you look frustrated. Frustration is a block goal. What goal are you trying to achieve that is being blocked for you? Like he's trying to talk to the kid again, talk about raising him up to another level. But frustration is a blocked goal. If something is being blocked from your grasp, then you may think it's disappointment, but in reality, it's more likely frustration. And as my wise daughter said, it's stagnant anger. Why is it making you angry? Is that anger productive? Every time my daughter gets the call, it throws more fuel onto her little angry pile. Her expectations were not unrealistic, right? As again, Google would tell you sometimes your expectations are too high. No, not at all. Of course, they told her it would be there. Why would she expect them to be lying? Or why would, my daughter was raised in a very positive thinking family. She wouldn't expect the worst, hope for the best. That's not how she thinks. That's not how any of us think. So when that comes, you're like, wait, what? That's not right. And so she and I were having this discussion just because, we talk about everything in our family. And I was like, okay, look, your car's been down and out for 2.5 months now. How can we use this to our advantage? Well, number one, what's nice is she's getting herself carted around by her brother. They're having to share, they're learning to work together. Thank you, God. Like for me as a mom going, this is beautiful because she has to work with her brother, something that's not always come simply. So as a mom, I'm looking at this going, this is awesome. It's also teaching her to fight for herself, to fight for what she needs. That's another story for another day, but she has learned so many things about being forthright and standing her ground and saying, no, you said this. I demand that you live up to your part of the bargain. And so she's learning how to be strong at 18. As a matter of fact, that we had to speak to a manager because they were giving us the runaround, and he finally called me back. He said, I need to give you a compliment on your daughter. He listens to the recording, right, of the mechanic. And he said, she stood her ground. Well done. And the mechanic was basically trying to talk her into buying a new car. And he's like, nope, I like my car. Fix it. You know how, right? Anyhow. So you can look at that and say, Eden is using this time for her advantage and learning and growing. And she's not sitting there like, I don't have my car, I have to take stupid Uber or whatever. And no. Plus, she's making a bunch of money as a waitress and she's stacking it up. So she'll now have plenty of money, where before she was going, oh my word, this is going to cost me kind of a lot. And now she has way more than enough. It's working to her advantage. So like her, you and I have two choices. We can whine about our situation and complain. But if we choose that, we have to say, what's the fruit? Is this beneficial? When we have a situation that feels disappointing, but really it's frustration, anger, and sadness, if we complain and vent and whine about it, is that profiting us anything? Or our second choice is acknowledge the frustration, release it, using our oils, breathing, prayer, breathing again through those times when the anger wants to take root. And then once we know that it's released, begin to see the situation to your advantage. I'm not saying that this happens in a 10-minute period. This can be a couple days or a couple weeks. Doesn't matter. The point is are you moving forward to dealing with disappointment in a healthy and thriving way? If you can start to see every block as a stepping stone rather than a barrier, you will begin to see incredible new opportunities all around you. And with that, the last thing I would say is journal. What ways can you use this setback to your advantage? Even the loss of my husband It's a big deal. I'm now raising kids without their dad. Father's Day is coming. That's crappy. But we're using this to our advantage. There's a lot of things that we've done and learned in spite of the loss. Of course, we've grieved it. Of course, we're sad. I've grieved the times that the coffee shop that we thought we would have in Boston to minister to kids. Doesn't mean I'm not going to have that. It just won't have him with me. But the moment I realized I had to let go the idea of having someone with me, things progressed much quicker. When you journal ideas and thoughts, things become crystal clear. I'm so big on journaling. I talk about it in every situation, every class, because it works and it's so powerful, especially in dealing with disappointment, subheading or, subpoint, frustration, sadness, and anger. Because you can start to see the truth about what was the root of the disappointment, which emotion, maybe all three, one or none of the above, right? And then go, okay, how can I use this? I think collectively as a world, we had 2020 be a huge disappointment. And yet, some of us just kept going and kept working and kept doing the thing we were called to do because we knew our purpose. I remember thinking when the boys that live with us wanted to still have open mic nights, I'm like, yes, have people over. Of course, we're not going to let the government or some virus pester us. No. We can pray and we're going to keep going on the mission we're supposed to do. This is silly. I'm not going to let somebody else tell me. If they didn't walk on water or part any seas, no one's going to tell me what to do. Thank you very much. That is the motto that I have gone by for now since February 2022 plus years. It's worked pretty well. I suggest maybe you take a cue from that. Dealing with disappointment is really simpler than someone thinks. Number one, knowing the true emotion behind it. Number two, knowing your life purpose so that you're able to move up and over barriers. And number three, using those barriers to your advantage. I hope this has helped you. I pray that it has. If you haven't heard the class that we did on ridding yourself of bitterness, I highly recommend you go back, listen to that. This adds on. And as I mentioned earlier, next week's class is going to be our final one in the trio and alleviating anger. I think you guys will get a lot out of that one.